All right, let's get started here. So it's a pleasure to have Roshan Shankar here with us. Roshan has a master's degree in public policy and computing from Stanford. And after he finished his education at Stanford, he moved to India. He volunteered for the Aam Aadmi Party, and he's currently an advisor for the Delhi government on various issues regarding governance, all kinds of public infrastructure, and he has worked with multiple ministries. And here today, he was also at the AI for Democracy workshop, if folks have attended that workshop. And we actually got in touch initially with Roshan as part of Project Karya, where we wanted to try and see if the Delhi government would have some interesting work for us to do there. And that's how we got in touch. And I think since then, our engagement with Roshan has grown. And today, he's here to talk to us about a number of ideas, from 10 it has increased, on how technologies can help towards better governance. Yeah. To you, Roshan.
Thanks, Vivek. Sorry for the change in the name of the title. After I looked at the different groups that were working at Microsoft, I figured 10 would be too round a figure number to give. And also, some things are just plain good luck in life. So we may do all the right things and we might still need luck. So hi, everyone. My name is Roshan Shankar. Vivek has done a very good job of introducing me, so we can jump to the meat of it. I think it's important to say who I am and where I'm coming from. So I'll leave the slides with you guys, but any comments that I make in 40 minutes that have sometimes a little bit too much gyan is just the paucity of time, and it's also coming from many different sectors. So analogies, similes, metaphors, aphorisms, idioms. There's a lot of things going on in my head. So if I say something that's a little bit too generic or not useful at all, please feel free to stop me. Ask me more, prod me more about why I'm saying that. But broadly, I've worked in state, market, and civil society, if you can call it that. In the state, I've worked with the Delhi government, helped a few governments in other states as well, doing the same ideas. Been working with different academics of different kinds to study the same work that we've been doing. So that's given me a useful lens of thinking about the city of Delhi from multiple academic as well as practitioner lenses. I've also worked in the private sector, so I don't draw salary from the Delhi government. I consult with various organizations, which you'll see there. So they include comedy groups, which do YouTube and Hotstar comedy, to something like an MIT JPAL or the RAND Corporation, where I'm doing very boring, seemingly boring data work. So that's the broad context of who I am. I think, again, why I removed the better India part of it is sometimes we have a lens of what we think is better. And I was trying to come to a lowest common denominator of what connects all of us. And that could be a good enough why. Something that we don't read very often repeatedly. We're in India, I think, because of the paucity of money and power from most, and agency from most people's lives, we think about rights a lot more than we do about duties. These are the 11 fundamental duties of the Indian Constitution. And they talk about, there's a few that the country by and large seems to be obsessed with, like respecting the national flag, the national anthem, cherishing the freedom struggle, I mean, in ways that are not, exactly comprehensive. And there's some that are completely out of our radar. So I don't think we get up in the morning and say, hey, it's our duty to develop scientific temper, humanism, and the spirit of inquiry and reform, right? And since these sort of come together as a bouquet, and if I remember correctly, a lot of my PhD friends in maths and physics used to say there are 11 dimensions to whatever computation happens in space or in math. I think these are good 11 dimensions to think about India. So I think whenever you apply any problem to it, this is a very good framework because the constitution, laws, policies, at least de jure, follow the rights as well as these duties. So when we think about Gandhi's vision of Swaraj, Swaraj roughly translates sometimes into self-rule or self-determination, but it is also self-governance. Is what are you doing for the collective as opposed to the collective is doing to you. Again, through those multiple sectors, I think if I had to break down how we've been able to find some degree of success without breaking unit economics in the company, which is we don't bleed revenue to gain profit, or we don't become loss making to be profitable in the longer run, as well as trying to see, as well as several successes and failures in politics and government. I think this is how I think of the problem space. So if you're a technologist, you have great skill sets in a certain area of inquiry or a way of applying certain spheres of human knowledge. I would think of Indian problems as a vector. So, and there's always some degree of detail that you've always forgotten. So I think it's useful to frame problems as that. Sometimes if binaries are easy, threes are a thing still. So I think that's an improvement than twos. But I think it's a broad set of things. And that's why when we don't think of things as vectors, we start putting them in competition with each other, or either on the same dimension, or we start comparing things which are apples and oranges, right? Problem solving approach should definitely be local. I think unlike most other countries, cities, states of the world, we have a severe data problem. So sometimes we are solving problems without knowing the true source of data, right? So a lot of problems don't have verifiable, quantifiable data around it. So it's better to think of your problems by solving as locals. If you want to solve a mobility problem, take your neighborhood, see what the walkability in that area is, how many trees come on the road, how many signages come on the road. And when you attack problems like that, it will give you an approach to solving the larger stack of the same problem. So if my neighborhood looks like that, there's a high degree of possibility that 5 neighborhoods around me look like that, and that's being useful. I think in visualizing the problem, it's always useful to think as fractals. And this is, again, some gyan, but I love geometry a lot. And when thinking of both vectors and local, and how do you put all these things together? And a lot of governance, or what we call public problem solving, is very complicated. It's always, we like this much democracy, we don't like that much. So even when we want democracy at the center and the state and the national level, we very rarely practice it with our friends and our homes, right? So how often have you democratically had a debate and won over your parents, right? And sometimes we expect some things which are far away in an idealistic sense, but we don't do it at home. And in terms of solution framing, it's always good to say, hey, I think we have a part of the solution. Not saying, I think a lot of people just, when they bludgeon themselves and they say that this is the right answer, you invariably will find enough opponents and enough ideologues of different kinds who will find a way to poke holes into what you're doing. But saying that, hey, I think we found a way of saying something is useful. Also thinking of things as a stack is useful. I think that's something that you're used to. But the fact that you need to solve certain problems in certain ways, but there's multiple parts to the same problem, right? And let's say we have the ideal democracy in almost every sense. The fact that we have a liberal democracy will mean that even if justice exists in every format, as the social, political, and economic, the justice that people feel may be different. And working on that is equally a responsibility in what we hope to construct as a liberal democracy. May or may not want, is a different issue. And I think the 4 sort of things that have come out in growth, maybe they come out to you in different ways, but for me, since we work a lot on ground and with people, looking at truth, ethic, dialectic, and aesthetic. So finding a way to look at data at the fundamental core, or as it is, finding a way in which you can do things the right way, discussing it with a huge number of people and from different backgrounds, and trying to make it as beautiful as possible in the way that aesthetic is perceived, whether that's peak shift, which is everything from six-pack abs to that's the peak shift of aesthetic, to seeing whether something that's usual can be made beautiful. I think that those are ways in which you could possibly think about any social problem that you're thinking about doing and about solving. And please feel free to interrupt at any point of time. I promise this will get a lot less dense in a bit. And finally, I think in terms of, and since you'll be doing computation, you'll be thinking of structures. I heard someone was looking at operating systems for people who don't have the agency to go through text and code. A whole set of interesting ideas could emanate. I think these steps of looking at data the problem. The problem statement itself, the people who are facing that problem is useful. And in many of these steps is where we are unable to solve certain problems. So I know that someone's working on air quality here. There's no way you can do air quality machine learning or deep learning till you have tens of thousands of data points being reported every 15 minutes from certain areas. There's no way in which you'll be able to do hyperlocal pollution abatement if you don't have a way of saying what is causing the pollution in this 1 square kilometer region. Because if you don't have that answer, it's very hard to convince stakeholders who are usually risk averse and wanting to put the agency of solving that problem on some other agency. So having a really good handle on the problem itself through these steps could be useful. Why 13? Sorry, Vivek, we changed from 10. I just was going through 10 seemed like the Dashavatar and the 10 commandments, and I didn't want to do that. I came to 11, and then there was the Article 51A. It's actually quite useful in thinking of some of the things that you do in computation, applying the principles that you learn, everything from operating systems, programming languages, optimization. A lot of those concepts, if you apply them exactly in the exact same way to your life, you might arrive at almost the same conclusions as most people are. It's just that most people don't apply the competence that they have in their field to others. Mine was actually poker. So I'm a very, pretty good poker player. And just knowing that game well enough allows you to arrive at almost the same conclusions and apply it to other problems as well. And so that's the fundamental duty. So there's 11 fundamental duties are just like the Pascal triangle. So you can keep rinse repeating them and they sort of mirror each other in different areas. That's one way in which we tell ourselves certain things, certain stories to keep ourselves functional. 12 is a sublime number, as you well know. And 13 is the first compound. So it's like, it doesn't come as 1 plus or 2 plus 10. And the luck bit of it came from the fact that I think we're in a country where we have a deep technological as well as a social problem. It's not necessary that we will emerge out of many of the problems that we are in. This could be anything from the middle income trap that we are walking into to an illiberal society that we might be constructing by not having an organization of liberal ideas. So I wanted it to be memorable in some way. So 13 and lucky sort of will at least be opposite enough for you to remember. Getting to the ideas, I sort of broke it down into 3 components. Just try to look at, since there were some people doing systems engineering, some doing programming languages, some people doing a host of things, I just wanted to look at some ideas from layers of collectives of people, so from the individual to different layers of collectives, and we always go from individual to collective directly. So citizen first, nation first. So there's a lot in between that's lost in generality, and in a country that is so large and so diverse, we very rarely can generalize all the levels in between. I think for the individual level, there's data, the existence of data itself is missing in many, many sectors of decision-making, of governance, of any kind of policy that affects your life. And when that doesn't happen, you're making, well, broadly heuristic decisions. So I'd say even if the Delhi government or the Aam Aadmi Party has done good work in education, it's because it's broadly heuristic in the sense that if an individual spends 60% of their income on rent, food, electricity, healthcare, water, and education, broadly the government should also do the same thing, right? So we haven't optimized it. It's not an efficient system, but we are broadly in the right direction, and that's why maybe we get some positive in that space. But the flip side of it is interesting for you, is that creating data sets which are unique and show a glaring spotlight on the problem could help move the system or change things in ways that you don't envision. I think for us, the ASER report, which was done by Pratham, was a very useful metric. So when you don't really know what literacy is, and then every educationist is debating what literacy is, what education is, whether it's writing these books or that books, or what true knowledge or enlightenment is, and you can get stuck in that very broad debate about what education is. You still do have a basic metric of literacy. You still do have certain books in school that are currently being prescribed and are being read. And ASER just showed the difference that existed between the two, which is get class X people to read class X minus 3 books. Let's do things at class X level and test them on class X minus 3. And even when they did it at that level, they were able to show that maybe 80% of India in some way or the other was illiterate or uneducated. And that has in itself, I think the Asar report is one of those reports which is at least brought the glaring spotlight on the fact that there are very few learning outcomes. And that was just one pilot. It was a few schools, a set of people, I think a lot of physicists and mathematicians on the first team that did it as well. And then it's almost forced every government in the country to use that as a metric of defining learning outcomes in the absence of anything else being there. And now you can even think of policy coming about because of that one report and one study. Right? So I think creating data as a public good is a very useful way of bringing a glaring spotlight on the problem and also trying to solve it. So the second I thought was visualizing your fundamental rights and duties. And again, the right to education, a lot of the rights that we have, they aren't really measured in any way. And I know it's hard, but some things you can have tendencies towards. You don't need to put an exact number to. So what does a person who's an upper middle class or an upper class in South Delhi have as right to freedom of expression or movement across the country? Right? And you can break that down into what money it takes to cover how many kilometers in how many minutes. And you can start thinking about, hey, I think people in Jharkhand in this district have far less agency of mobility than someone in South Delhi who lives close to the Delhi airport, right? Because of certain various reasons, and that can be whatever. But just showing that will be extremely useful in saying who has more rights or less. And that's where some of the debates come in, the multidimensional debates. And the third bit is, I think, comes from the last fundamental duty, which is education. I think there'll always be, we already have a deep problem in the sense that for the last 20, 25 years, we've given a lot of degrees out, but we've not educated people in any systematic or any relevant way for their lives. And then there's the constant gap is being bridged between education and employability. And if that's the sole target, you're always going to be, you might leapfrog once or twice where you predict the future well enough and you leapfrog that by a little bit and you'll have a bunch of people employed. But I think constant learning for different individuals in different ways is something that could be thought about. And currently, most of the ecosystem, whether it's the private market or the public market, fails at this because the public market or the public marketplace for education is either has complete misallocation of resources due to problems of the political economy, and the private sector is focused on where there is conversion into certain degrees of consumerism, right? So they're not learning citizenry may all be byproducts, but the first part of any startup or any new company doing ed technology will have to be monetized, which is why even something like an Unacademy or a Udemy or Coursera or Udacity have to get to the K through 12 market, have to get through the competitive exams market, which are already on certain parts of current learning, but only a few of them are able to pivot it into learning. And there's some markets which are completely untapped, which is early childhood education. There's no one, at least at scale, thinking within the government and outside about early childhood.
Are there any learning outcomes mentioned in ATE?
That's a very good question. Actually, unfortunately, outcomes as well as funding for a lot of mandates in central laws that have rights, including the right to education, are completely missing.
Private companies.
Sorry, I'll repeat the question.
Yeah. So are the private companies making and taking advantage of that? Right? Is it like a capitalization?
Yeah, I mean,
because of weak public policy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say whether they're taking advantage or not. There's a clear demand in the market. There's a clear void as well of data, and they're utilizing that well. I mean, at least they are delivering their content well. I prefer, there's very few capitalists I begrudge. And I will tell you about them, but those are systemic. There's sins of commission. There's far-reaching impacts on the economy. But I wouldn't characterize anyone doing, for example, health tech or ed tech or begrudge them because they will find their use case someday. So, for example, you could potentially have enough number of doctors at the primary healthcare and community healthcare level in the next 20 years that can cater to India in some way. But regardless of what happens in the next 40 years, you will not get mental health care professionals at that scale. So healthcare tech will be needed in that space, as I see it.
Okay, so I mean, what does it mean for tech developers or for
Yeah, I
actual,
mean, so it's
for-
hard. It's a very hard space. So I think you have to, yeah. I'll come to it in a bit, but I think there's a certain place where the money of the world is running, and there's a lot of ideas of the world that are also running. So I find it in my private work as well. There's very few environmental engineers that are available in this country, right? And that's been because computer science is seen as the path to prosperity. It has very low investment in equipment, at least in a large part of the field. It has global acceptance. It's a path for upward mobility. It's a thing that gets you a job in the US. It gets you to a good university. There's too many things that are, and then the VC ecosystem, the Menlo Park ecosystem, they aren't investing in air purifiers, they're investing in air data companies, right? And for a large part of the world, that will be true, is that they have enough sensors. It's just that for our context, those companies are by and large useless, for now, at least. So, yeah, I don't know. In choosing the problem, sometimes you'll have to trade off what problem you're solving, whether it's going to be the long run or not, and where you merge with the existing ecosystem that's going along. I don't know how to trade off profit and what you're building, but but definitely there is a cost to being responsible, and there's a cost to being ethical, which you'll definitely have to factor into your Excel sheet.
Going back to your first question about data for public good, how much of an appetite is there in the governance hierarchy and layers to consume data? I mean, you've given the example of one report.
Yeah.
But is that the exception, or is that like a norm?
Yeah, so that's an example. So the example that I gave about education data and the ASAR report is an example to say if no one wants to change in the system, you can still force them to do so by producing something that's extremely relevant at that scale and that identifies the problem very simply. I think in other sectors, you'll find that there's a lot of appetite in government for data. But unfortunately, there's a great mismatch between how public procurement of any services or products happens inside the government, which every government tries to incrementally or at least change in some way or the other. So for example, this government has a Quality Council of India where startups can empanel themselves and they can do interesting visualization at the central government level. But the creation of data itself creates some degree of truth, right? And or at least a path to find it, which is not necessarily useful in a lot of sectors. So I would say in the social sector where you're measuring individuals, there's a lot of interest. So you'll find everyone being obsessed about measuring learning outcomes, at least they say it out loud. So you'll find the report saying that. Like a Niti Aayog will say we should measure all these things, right? But at the state level where you have sometimes unfunded mandates, right? So the center is saying, hey, do this, but they don't get the money to do that, which is one of the examples, one of the things behind the right to education data not being available. The right to education, I think section, I don't remember the section, it says digitize all data. And it says the states must make rules. But when states don't have enough money and when the center doesn't fund that mandate of creating the data, we have no good examples of publicly available education data, which should have been the first point of getting in. The only places which have been able to solve that have been states which are well funded. So maybe Tamil Nadu does it well in creating internal data sets. There have been examples where non-profits work with the public sector. So Sikshana in Karnataka is a good example of that. We ourselves have not been able to work at scale on education data despite being able to do a lot in schools. That's an administrative challenge. So there's different reasons why, but I think there's definitely, I would say this, most of the power and money is heavily centralized, and it's shocking how centralized it is. Like within parties, within government, within the private sector as well, right? And you probably know this from various sources or Piketty or things like that. That gives you the opportunity to find people who will be champions of consuming data. So if an IS officer's annual confidentiality report is well, sometimes going to be measured by how much he's in cahoots or in friendship with the current incumbent government. But there's a large degree to which there's also, hey, did this person do interesting, innovative things when they were in government? So, for example, efforts that we've made in two sectors, especially. So, working with the Wish Foundation in Delhi on the Mohalla Clinics data, where we have now about 11 million unique patients who visited a Mohalla Clinic for primary healthcare to receive a test, medical services, or whatever. We should be able to open that up if all bureaucratic challenges are solved in the next few months. Another example would be in Delhi, we have opened up transit data, something that Bangalore might have already, because Bangalore has had a different history of civic activism within the city. But now Delhi's transit data at buses, cluster buses, is all available for developers in real time and available for citizens in part time. So, and this was despite all the media noise that you hear about, hey, no one wants to work with each other, or this person isn't allowing this person to work. You can still find there are enough in between people in whose benefit it is to do good and to make their careers look good. So you have to find some what's in it for me, depending on your context and your problem. So young IS officers, I would always, anyone who's become an IS officer since 2005 or 7, who's grown up with at least enough chatter about corruption, right? Whether they believe in it or don't. And there's also enough chatter about regional, local, like the fact that problems need to be solved locally. Anyone who's heard both of these things will invariably probably like public data or data as a public good, because all these people have no agency or no money to go to a Microsoft research. So an IS officer doesn't have the agency or the money to come to a Microsoft research. The state government does, but it's probably not going to use it. So maybe the idea is for Microsoft research is masters and bachelor students to go to the IS and solve that problem there, throw a spotlight on that, and hey, see, this is great. And that peak shift also helps. A lot of the things that have worked in Delhi, despite not having a formal hire and fire power of a government, is just because we have 1,000 teachers. 50 of them start performing well. You send them to Harvard. You give them a state teachers award in an award that looks like the Filmfare Awards with the proper ceremony. Just makes them feel better about their own lives and the fact that they were doing public good always, and they're being recognized for it. That changes at least the next 150. And I think, if you have to look at a broad aggregate of my 6 years in politics and government and learning it by first principles, I would say less than 5% actually mean something really terrible. Like they mean, so they'll be like, I've heard engineers saying, let me make my money, no, I'll do your public good also. So malice is very small as a percentage. In the areas that I worked in the cities or states, yeah. I think that's one idea. So so you can, so we'll speed it on up a little bit. I'll leave the text as well. I think the next layer, I've just started to think about teams. So what happens is we go from the individual to a tribe when we attribute all the negatives of the tribe. I think there's two in between that are useful. These are startups, nonprofits, new kids on the block, as I like to call them, any collective of interesting people in any format. New kids doesn't mean that they are either new or kids. It means that they just have a fresh approach to solving the public problem. I think measuring sustainability is a great space which is completely open in almost every local government, state government. For example, Google's Sunroof does one version of being able to look at large-scale viability of solar installations in the country. A lot of problems that exist at different levels exist because the local level data doesn't exist for decision making. So while the ecosystem is very friendly to cement, steel, oil, guns, right, religion, right, and the ecosystem is very friendly to them because they have natural leverage of people and money, right, which is power in most senses. There's sustainability especially lacks almost all of it. So no one is, and it's even the big companies. So even a Renew Power or a Suzlon or Adani Power, a lot of these big companies could do the public good bit of it, of doing data, but they don't for whatever reason that their ecosystem prohibits them to do. So whether that's the water sector, whether that's sewerage in your states, whether that's energy, whether that's any other dimensions of environment, which includes biodiversity, which includes air quality. I think all of those sectors are completely open. There's very few people working on actual hardware or sensors for them. So if you go to an average city has at least, depending on the population, 15 to 35 to 40 sewage treatment plants. It has hundreds of underground reservoirs, booster pumping stations, sewage pumping stations. Maybe, let's say about 100, 150 institutions or buildings that do water or sewerage inside. Virtually no state in India has any sensor on them. So flow sensor, quality sensor, because it's when you start measuring that, you get into problems of input and output, and then you get into a problem with the contractor mafia, which invariably you'll get into a problem with the chief minister of that state, usually. I think Delhi is a reasonably good example of how it isn't. So that's completely open. So if you throw a spotlight on any of these things, and this could be local, 100 houses polled on the quality of water drinking over 100 days, 100 water samples, you could say interesting things about what's happening with water and sewerage in that area, and how the state is maybe not being useful in sharing that. I think the second is lowering the barrier of entry to politics. I think that's a very useful thing that a lot of teams could do in some way or the other. Our Democracy is a crowdfunding initiative that is picking up these days. The centralization of power and money also means that regardless of which party you're in, right? And this is not a partisan comment that I'm making. Regardless of which party you're in, the small guy always remains the small guy, or the woman is practically non-existent, unfortunately. And lowering that barrier to entry will get a lot of new different kinds of people come about. So whether that means different demography, whether that means different income strata, it'll just open up our democracy in ways that will necessarily, I think, be better. And the final thing is, I think, sharing leverage. Yeah.
Do you also mean governance or just politics? Or is it both or one or the other?
No, so I think when you do this, you will end up improving the other. I think the barrier of entry in policy or governance is a direct function of politics as the most statistically dependent variable. So, for example, you would find young people or lateral hires only in two kinds of governments. A government that is knows that the problem cannot be solved by the capacity or skills inside the government, or the fact that, hey, we need to get our friends inside government. Those are basically the two ways in which you could come into policy in India right now as a young person between, let's say, 25 to 40. If you're friends with the CM, or I think I'm a mix of both. And that's a function of lowering the entry barrier to politics. And why I'm saying that is, in the entire, let's say, supply chain of an election, where you're going from creating a brand, marketing yourself, doing election management. Let's say you have the right messaging, the right person. There's plenty of good people that we must know in our lives that would make a far better municipal councillor or a far better MLA than who you have currently. Now, that person doesn't get into it because obviously politics is bad, and I think that's gradually changing, and it will in due course. It just takes 10, 15 years for that to percolate into a different market. But even when we get to that point where enough people want to fight, there are several parts of it which are so opaque, which are so hard. And that would mean everything from the end, where you're managing an election, where you're trying to do polling booth management, where you're trying to prevent election malpractice. There are several spaces where technology could intervene in a very interesting way and integrate into the current process of politics. So what I'm saying is, it could be integration with the Election Commission, it could be outside as well. So I deeply believe that the Election Commission of India, this isn't the first time that they're failing. We've had, by and large, free elections. Our elections have never been fair, right? It has always been tilted towards money and power and whoever the incumbent government is, and with terrible rule of law, that's how it's going to be. The Election Commission has literally never done its job. It's just that they're now not doing it outrightly openly. So, for example, having a system, for example, just from my 3-4 election experiences, if there was an app that allowed me to do my election expenditure tracking, as well as being able to find ways of reporting electoral malpractice much faster, that integrated 3 or 4 different ways of doing it, I would have probably had a much easier time than finding the general observer, the returning observer, the chief election observer, the election commission, and that entire stack of communication, I could have been at least efficient at my end. Now, whether they do their job or not is I don't know, but sometimes even my reports during the day would go 5 hours late because of and sometimes it's process, sometimes it's an integration problem also, but several parts of this, right, just make people who should fight elections to not do so. So at least removing those barriers is what I'm saying. Over and above that, interest, happiness, and like whether they want to do it, whether they can withstand enough pressure, those are all different variables, but at least remove these parts. I think I'll quicken it up a little bit. And the last was the sharing leverage. So just like you guys have been kind enough to invite me here, which is sharing my ideas, so that's some kind of leverage that you've given me a platform to speak. Share your leverage, whatever you have, with as many people who share similar ideas to you. I think that's something that startups do very rarely, non-profits do very rarely, is that they get stuck into the me or the fact that I am solving the problem rather than the fact that the problem getting solved by others is equally good for your problem solving. I'll just go through it a little bit faster in maybe 10 minutes, and I'll take questions from 350. I think the third level is the herd, and this is where you get into policy, governance, administration. These are experts or intellectuals or practitioners who are working in these sectors of making policy, in making governance happen on ground, and administer the policies at the local level. I think there's a great space where you can spread good information quickly and aesthetically in an age where you have digital media and the cost of at least spreading ideas online is much lower than it is on TV or print. And from there you get great examples of journalism that is profitable as well. 3 specific examples that I can give to you are the Ken, the Better India, and the Logical Indian, right? And they all do one thing really well as the first part of their stack. So Ken's approach was, let's hit the place where millennials are, where the startups are, and where most of the money is going to flow in the next 10 years. At least that's my theory. So a lot of these things are my theories, right? And they've been able to find a market for that kind of content on a daily basis. They only do 1 story a day, while everyone else is doing 100. Logical Indian has figured out it's good to share ideas from across the board, which seem logical, which seems first principle, which seems nice. And the Better India is solving, I'm sure you've seen the Better India in Bangalore. It started as a blog. Himant and his wife started as a blog to find problem solvers. That became a problem solving blog. That became a Facebook page. Just doing that continuously and organically has, I think, allowed them to find some degree of sustainability as well for their ideas. And this is something that I might do a little bit towards the end of 2019 is a polymath project for self-governance. So there's a lot of different kinds of smart people doing interesting public good. So if anyone wants to work on that with me, say hello at any point of time. So can we bring different kinds of people together to solve public problems and frame solutions which are very accurate and very hard to deny? So I think good ideas need far more proof in India than bad ideas do. So gather as much data in your armory as you can. And the second is, I think, Indianizing your policy and governance communication. I think just if you know the language, if you know the context, if you know the mythology, if you know the culture, it is far easier to communicate that simply rather than with some extremely complicated ideals, which may not mean anything for the Indian context, which may be just a fact of lost in translation, which is secularism to dharmirpeksh, right? So there's words mean different things and in different places at different times, right? And nationalism might mean differently for different people. For me, I love the flag. Like I love Tendulkar. Like for an emerging free state that just came out of the shackles of colonialism, that flag means a lot to me, right? So we don't have to subscribe to the fact that nationalism is terrible for democracy. Right? Just don't be a tribe around it. The third is, and the last level intermediate before the collective is the horde, where I think these are the 4 fractures which you've seen. So because continuously, I think we've centralized money and power. And in the last 50, 60 years, we found these ways to fracture ourselves. And the stated aim was these identities, but the fundamental problem was still money and power not being with the right people. whether that's power to make decisions, power to devolve finances, whether that's participating in your own government, participating in your own elections. And I think there's some things that you can do that are great. I think the future of AI is something that is in the hands of mostly people who have certain kinds of agenda in their mind, especially in India. Um, and very few people will be thinking about the problems of AI and labor, the problem of AI and public leisure. Like, what does it mean to be leisurely in a society? What does it mean to be labor destructive or culturally destructive in an age of AI? Right? So things might solve the certain parts of your problem, which may not be as comprehensively defined, but what does that do to people around you? And that's worth thinking. And we are already in a space where thousands of people come and protest in our cities every day because they are not getting the right end of their deal, right? 35,000 farmers walked into Bombay and they said, help us and hear us. We haven't done that till now, and that might get accelerated in an age of AI. And to be prepared, at least both from the individual standpoint as well as the societal standpoint, I think you guys can contribute a lot to that by being extremely conscious and intelligent social technologists. Focus on untouched fundamental duties. So again, just going back to that, I think there's being scientific, being loving your environment are a very good way of tackling a whole bunch of these problems. So instead of directly attacking any of these identities, which are pretty deeply ingrained to us, to the point where I think even we would defend some parts of it. It's probably easier to find pivots around that by saying, hey, let's do something else. So if someone says, I'll build a temple, someone else says a mosque, you can say, I'll build a school, or you can say, I can build a university, or you can say, I don't know, you'll build something else. So have a third and fourth and fifth answer. I think this is what you were coming at, which is solve problems of necessity, not abundance. Because there's money thrown and there's happy hours and there's life is comfortable. Some problems are much easier to solve because you're comfortable while solving them. Some other problems are far harder. It's interesting. I don't have a particular predilection of which path to choose. It's really up to you. But if you can solve problems of necessity, not abundance, so see where resources are flowing. And if you can swim against the tide, it's great, but don't get swept by a wave away as well. In the Universal, I was looking at the Microsoft Teals program. So if you can take the Teals program everywhere in Delhi or anywhere, that'll be great. So this is the K through 12 teaching computer science program. So that was my request to Microsoft informally. And then I think there's two things that are useful, which even when you have enough agency and you have want, and I have enough of the right kinds of friends in the smart circles and the good universities, there's still and I can go ask for them for help, and I can go formally ask them for help as a government. There's still some spaces where solutions exactly don't exist, and if they do, please let me know. I may not have looked everywhere. I think there's medium difficulty tech, which is relatively untouched by the academics because they're solving the frontier of the problem. And because we don't have large enough research or development types of corporations, we have a service-oriented IT industry. A lot of systems inside government are usually designed by absolutely, by weird kinds of skill sets. I think there is an opportunity. So everything from thinking about revenue management systems, looking at computation inside the government on taxes. So even at the central level, when the GST network was being designed and the states got circulars on how the network would be designed, how the Aadhaar state repositories of data would be maintained, there's enough kinds of screwed up services, the Indian Information Service, the administrative services, which will compete and actually not do anything, and we're sort of still stuck behind. So an example of that in rigor mortis would be, if you use Gmail, you're actually violating the Official Secrets Act in India. So I've gotten a notice for that once because they said the data went outside India in some way. So that's, I mean, there's interesting things that definitely people can do to build or at least ideate around those stacks of solutions. So how could any of these solutions not be designed by the perfect private sector, but how would a very and this is a problem. Like some of these problems may get solved in 5 to 10 years, and then you're like, I wasted 2 years of my time solving a simple problem or not the frontier of a problem. But I think in this space, especially in revenue, in measuring sustainability, there's a pretty open space as well as a timeline to constantly improve. We have a very low tax base in whether it's GST or whether it's your income tax. We have a very low degree of people who are working on sustainability. These will be problems for 20, 25 years at least. So any part of the financial system, the markets, the SEBI, anything where you can find something to improve would be useful, at least in the short run. I think those are the first 5 very broad theoretical things. I think I'll now come down to some specifics on the institutions that run India. I think the Election Commission of India does a terrible job of running elections. I can say that again and again, because elections are not free, they are not fair. It's a mythology that we live in if we believe that. There's too much money, there's too much non-monetary kinds of benefits. There's just very poor lack of structure, process, whether it's campaigning, whether it's the election day, whether it's the polling booth, whether it's the election agents. There's just too many things screwed up there. I don't think all of them are solvable by technology, but I think a few of these problems are useful. So I think a lot of all the data is already publicly available. And I know that many different organizations have different ways of looking at data privacy, or that we will not touch this or we will touch this. But so if you wanted to go online today, you couldn't actually scrape all of it off, because Indian websites of the government are designed in ways that will break your script before you break their PDF files. But all the 900 million voters and their details are online right now, right? They're in PDFs. They're just in 29 different websites. So anyone who has a vested interest in being able to have insights about these people at scale, is able to do analytics about these people at scale, already has access to them. And maybe even before that, the large FMCG companies had access to that, right? Because it's all publicly available. So when you don't make that either openly available or publicly scrapable or put out whether you're a voter or not even, that happens only through the official NSVP website of the Election Commission, which is broken in several different ways. In every state, you'll actually see something called the State Election Commission and the Chief Electoral Officer. And those exist for just the fact that they couldn't kill each other. The Election Commission from India, the Chief Electoral Officer, that officer could run every level of election, right? They could run the state election, local election, panchayat election, because the voters remain the same. But the very fact that they couldn't kill off the other agency allows a huge amount of discrepancy to happen. So it might have happened in your voting times, that you exist in the state election role, in the national role, but you don't exist in the municipal role. And that's simply because the government has made it, unfortunately, your duty to figure out whether you're still a citizen who is allowed to vote or not. It's not like the burden of proof exists on them. In a country where that's the reality, you can either say no, you can keep saying no, it's your burden of proof to give me that, or you can figure out a tech way to figure out to people whether you're a voter today or not. And I think that's the most fundamental challenge and that's why I led in the institutions of the Election Commission. Very small percentage of our country votes. If more of them vote, it will be a better country in every election, just because of more people expressing their views in certain ways. And there are at least 10 to 15% people who are not allowed to vote by either human agency intervening in some way or by structural defects inside the EC. Moving through quickly, I think there's a lot of analytics and decision support that you can do in the government of India. I think there's a great deal of, I think you can do 2 things with the SDGs. There's 17 SDGs and SDGs are useful just because at least it's like 200 countries have agreed on this one thing together. They agree on the wording of this document together. This is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which ranges from eradicate extreme poverty to making sustainable cities, happy communities, everything. It's a reasonably well-worded document that's good to have as a reference point for any work that you do. Because if you're targeting any of those subjects, you will invariably find both help in terms of multilateral organizations, other people solving problems from a similar lens, and also money to solve that problem. So there may be incubators that are trying to solve that problem as well, and you might find an easier alignment than. So sometimes just framing whatever that you are doing in the lens in which the world has accepted a certain language is useful for communication, which is fundraising, which is spreading your idea. And when you're implementing, think of them together. So think of gender equality, digital work, uh, sustainable cities together, and then you have maybe Project Karya, which can be implemented in different parts of the city where there's a match between people who speak different languages and documents exist in their languages but are not available for insight. I think two other ideas are quantify the money received and spent by the government. So this is one thing that no one has done till now at scale because it just seems a little bit hard. So 1 rupee earned by the government, 1 rupee spent by the government. Where did it come from? Where did it go? But not just the very beautiful pie chart that's given at the end of the budget. Actually track that money down through various layers of government because there's devolution of funds. And this is where the policy and governance folks lose out a little bit because there'll be national experts, there'll be state experts, there'll be local experts. Very rarely do they come together and talk about, hey, but like when this 42% flew down here, this much went here, this much went there. The anti-corruption expert exists across all these platforms, right? So he's able to talk about black money in the national, he's able to talk about the mafia at the state, he's able to talk about local poor materials and corruption in the local government. No one's sort of seamlessly integrated the person who knows about all these three layers along with the flow of money. It could be a very interesting project. I don't think anyone has done it in any reasonably insightful way. They've done it definitely as an Excel sheet, which is we earned revenue receipts like this, we spent expenditure receipts like this, but how, when, where? And there's various kinds of data sets that you can use to arrive at that same thing, just that they are either unscrapable or if they are scrapable, people haven't reached that. So one place, for example, to go would be the controller of legal accounts in the government of India. Regardless of what budget has been allocated, you'll find that invariably a lot of times the money is spent in the last 2 months of the financial year. This might be true in your organization as well, but I hope not. And what happens in that is corruption, purchase of hardware, a lot of different kinds of infrastructure being built that's pointless, and allocation to projects that are not useful. Right? So the controller of legal accounts would be a very good office to go and see, hey, did they actually spend the money in this month? And if so, on what date? And if so, who cut the check? If so, to which contractor? And there's enough public data, for example, on your state government and your local government websites to show who are the bad contractors and put a spotlight on them. It's just that some journalists will get there and they'll do that'll be a breaking news story. But if someone solved that platform problem, you could find a lot of other breaking news journalists. Every journalist loves breaking news. Every journalist loves to have a front page or a cover page article. Getting them that data might be the way to do it. I think it's similar in state government. The only thing I'd add to both quantifying a lot of these quantifying, measuring, visualizing is thinking about the topology of your states, thinking about how graph theory solves problems. So when we were planning the creation of Mohalla clinics in Delhi, it was a spatial problem that we looked at. So we mapped the city into 1,500 square kilometers. We fairly knew that our city would have 3,000 units of half a square kilometer each. It was helpful that the first Delhi that was ever settled in Delhi was half a square kilometer by a guy called Anangpal Tomar. So this is the guy before Prithviraj Chauhan came into being. So it's a useful metric of saying, hey, it's like the Delhi of the past where it was only half a square kilometer. But when you also get to the fact that, hey, let's put one Mohalla clinic in every 3 of these sabas, let's put it in the middle one of them. It's a very easy spatial problem. And then you just need to say, okay, 700 of these sites work, 300 don't. And so it's easier to reimagine some of these things from first principles than it is to where you find yourselves today, which is a lot of nomenclature discussion about policy and state policy and ideas. And finally, in the local government, I think I'd focus on the first, which is union, state, and concurrent lists. So how do you get from who's solving what? I think who's on first, what's on second, I don't know is on third. Well, it used to be a great sketch comedy show that Abbott and Costello used to do. And literally people don't know who's on first. Like people don't know who is the part of the problem. You can say what the problem is. Air quality, you can never definitively say who is the problem. But if you were able to measure energy, environment, water, mobility, 4 sectors in every city, you can definitely specifically say who is the problem. Because the energy is very clearly with one person. The environment is very clearly with one person. Mobility is sometimes with different people, and solid waste is very clearly with one agency. But since no one's put together these 4 parts which sort of affect your air, and industries, etc., do as well, but I'm taking Delhi as a use case. you're never able to say who is the problem. So even if you improve things a little bit by making electricity 24/7 or you did solar power, the aggregate is weighing you down so much that everyone's saying, oh, but you guys haven't done anything. So it's the same. Visualizing and also granularizing it will be able to clearly say who is the problem. And the final is sort of outcomes and forms and functions. I'll leave you to read that. I think it's just don't make technology before you talk to people, before you've actually seen the process. So for example, a lot of money that is spent in your public utilities, whether that's water, public roads, or urban development, you can see this in almost any state, invariably will choose the technology in the tender itself. And while this may be a problem that you think is not politically solvable, doing a pilot in your area which does green sewage treatment. So we actually did 15 pilots in Delhi across the city, in schools, in the NDMC, with central government, with state government. And we were able to very clearly show that the cost of sewage treatment should probably be 16 or 18 times less than what it is right now. And the thing is, they cannot deny that, right? Once you have functioning, running plants in your area, which is a pilot even of a green treatment plant, you can take that to the National Green Tribunal and say, I don't know what these guys are saying. They seem, I don't know, maybe they're part of the mafia. I don't know, they're part of something else. But we very clearly can do this problem at 16 times lesser the cost. And the Green Tribunal will give you an order saying, hey, go with 200 more of them. So it's not necessary that you need to find the government to be pliant or viable. To your answer, you just need to move enough of the institutions around them to make them uncomfortable enough to solve the problem, or to be, well, join the ride along with you. I think the judiciary is a great place to, again, intervene. So I think Legal X at Stanford did a great job of some of these things. I'd encourage you to look at that. But bringing technology inside the process of the justice delivery. So visit a court sometime, look at all the things that happen. In 5 days, you will figure that half of the pendency in our courts is purely a process and tech problem. Witnesses don't show up. Lawyers don't show up. Very rarely, judges also don't show up. If everyone knew who was coming at what time and was brought at the right time together, that's literally 30% of your pendencies, at least in Delhi Sessions courts, right? And that's an easy tech play. Thinking of, again, infrastructure, right? People say, especially in infrastructure, we very rarely able to unit plan or unit visualize what is going to happen, right? So we're able to see what learning looks like, healthcare looks like, a lot of those things, because we know what the unit of us requires. But we very rarely think about what is the ppm of air I require, what is the of pollutants, what is the amount of square footage I require. And when you do that at scale, it's very easy to build a lot of public infrastructure. So a lot of the things that we've done is just aggregating resources at scale, planning at scale, and just modularly delivering those things. And that's definitely something that you can do. Thinking about Africa and South America, very frequently we only think about US, UK, Europe for all our ideas and all our examples. But go to Africa, go to South America, explore cities, countries there, read about their governance. You'd find fascinating examples of things that are happening. I think Lesotho, for example, has one of the better Supreme Courts because most of its judgments come in 20, 25 pages. It's citizen friendly as a Supreme Court. Similarly, Kenya is thinking about open sourcing its, videotaping all its proceedings, right? Sharing a spotlight on that and then comparing, contrasting, all those are useful ways. I think finally, the fact that most of the people inside government will not be prepared for algorithms, AI, and a lot of these things. So, like I think even at the AI and Democracy conference, they spoke about how traffic fines have been allocated by state governments based on image data. Who created that algorithm? Like, how did we agree upon that together? Who is allowed to say 61 is this and in this frame rate 57 is this? And who decides? So I think we come to a lot of the who watches the watchman problem, especially in algorithms, because they may look wonderful when it comes out of your mind, but your mind is biased enough or it is primed enough to make certain variables to be more important than others. And maybe even algorithms, when they learn on their own, do that. Finally, just 3 quick things. I think media, there's a great space to filibuster the existing media. I think, for example, Dhruv Rathi does great content, which is alternative content from The Wire and alt news and things like that in a very simple bullet point format. And that's why he has views. Ravish Kumar on this side does great content, but in the same TV format. Both of them have viewers. Arnab Goswami does different content in a different tone, and that has a certain number of viewers. So instead of focusing on the content of what they're doing, thinking about the form of what media is doing could be very interesting. One idea that I had always was, why can't we have debates on Facebook Live or on Google Hangouts in some way? 4% debates where you actually use the techniques of debating. I have a big point, I have a small point. I think it should be possible in some way. And if you do that aesthetically well enough, you could create a place where simple and ethical debating and dialectic can come back rather than just arguing and trying to put your point ahead. There's 4 other institutions that people frequently forget about, just like it's towards the end of my presentation. So that's the Comptroller, Auditor General, the Central Vigilance Commission, the Central Information Commission, and the Law Commission. Frequently ignored by most people inside government, quite important. As a very dear mentor of mine said, Roshan, focus on the main document and be the guy who actually writes it. It's a lot of work, but you can get a lot of insidiously good ideas in there if you're actually doing the writing and if you're doing the actual work. And I think all these institutions are in some way doing the same for our country. So the Law Commission comes up with consistent sets of rules that are useful for society, keep saying remove the Indian Penal Code. They say all the right things and they've done enough reports. Visualizing a bunch of their reports could be fascinating. Again, the Comptroller Auditor General is the repository of data that all the good people in this country, whether they're making private sector decisions or political decisions, would need. CAG reports are the bedrock of how, in the last 10 years at least, different governments have gone up and down. Finding that to be more accessible, searchable, would be very interesting. Similar with the Vigilance and Information Commission as well. Finally, I think this is the hardest problem, the legislature. Most of your state legislatures look nothing like you. Most of you are not corrupt. Most of you are not communal. Most of you are quite young. Most of you are men and women both, and third genders and other spectrums as well. Your parliaments and state legislatures are mostly criminals, mostly communal, mostly casteist, mostly all the things that you don't desire. If you have, that's the jump actually in a very vector sense. That's the hardest I think to make. It's because our parliament looks nothing like our country. Gradually it might, but in some incremental ways. So you have both Kanhaiya rising and you have Tejasvi Surya and Bangalore rising. It's interesting. At least we're getting to a space where you're getting closer to what we look like inside parliament. Helping that in any way that you can. And I think the one that I was always interested in is, since I've written a few manifestos for the party, I've always wondered, why don't we write our own manifesto and share it with the political party and say, hey, we'll do 7 things out of these 10 things that you want. Right? Well, is there a way of aggregating individual opinion at scale and coming up with a vision that can encompass all of them in some way or the other, or balance them out algorithmically? We've already obviously done that systematically or by principles, but doing that at scale, just imagine if any of you could help me with this, if in the next Delhi elections, we were able to go out to the Delhi public and say, hey, we want to get all of your opinions, like literally all, and we want to make a manifesto based on that. What would that problem space look like, right? We've never asked, first ask yourself, what do you want, right? A bus every 15 minutes near my house, air to breathe, write 15 things down. Can you aggregate that at scale and come up with something? Maybe useful, because then that has a lot more ownership. When you've said something, when you've put your money in, when you've put your view in and it shows up somewhere, it's usually good in some way or the other. It's just like keep this as my, again, for whom, in a very vector sense, again, just like the fundamental duties, these are sort of, if those were the inputs and incomes, the fundamental duties, these are your outputs and outcomes. So connecting that slide to this slide is usually useful. We don't really, again, pay attention. I think it's useful to just stare at this slide at home for like an hour and just keep thinking about every word and what it means and where it came from. Because it's a very, very well-written set of, dense set of words. Yeah, I think this is the last set I'll leave you with, which is just, I think a lot of people who are trying to do good end up not doing good because they're not having fun, or they're not happy, or they're solving problems that are far bigger than they are themselves. And sometimes they don't care enough about their own problems as much as they do about public problems. I think that's been a little bit of a learning myself, but also around friends that I've seen. So yeah, have fun while you're solving problems. I think that's the one takeaway. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, let's thank Roshan. I guess we are over time, but Roshan is going to be here today. He's also going to be here tomorrow. If any of you want to, I guess there were fairly dense set of ideas. So maybe if you want to introspect and then talk to him about anything specific, he's around tomorrow to meet. You can contact Satish to set up a meeting with Roshan if you want. And if you have any questions now, you can feel free to shoot.
Okay, it was genius then. Thank you.